1903, late August, the Arctic Circle. By every known rule of survival, this expedition should have turned back before it ever began. The calendar still claimed summer, but the Arctic had already closed its fist. The sea skin was tightening. The wind carried iron. Light lingered longer than it should. A deceptive mercy that convinces men they have time when they do not. In that narrow window, a small survey party stepped off the last reliable coastline and committed themselves to land no map could defend them from. They believed they were alone. History insists this is where rational planning ends and faith begins. No modern supply chain, no radio, no reinforcement, only dogs, sleds, rifles, and the stubborn arithmetic of men who believed preparation could substitute for mercy, against cold that kills without anger, against darkness that arrives without warning, against something the local Inuit refused to name without lowering their voices. The Adlet, half man, half dog, a thing spoken of not as legend, but as a warning, not a monster that charges screaming, but one that watches, that waits, that hunts the way soldiers do, probing, testing, learning patterns. The men laughed when they first heard the word. They stopped laughing within days. The expedition's official purpose was clinical and modest. Chart river mouths, measure coastal drift, record elevations, collect photographic plates. On paper, this was a scientific errand. In reality, it was a forward reconnaissance into an environment that had defeated armies of better-equipped men. The leader, disciplined, methodical, trained to believe that nature could be reduced to data, had chosen his team carefully. Surveyors hardened by field work, sailors accustomed to ice, dog handlers who trusted their animals more than their own instincts. No romantics, no cowards, and yet no one aboard the steamer could ignore the silence when the Inuit pilots refused to accompany them inland. They would guide the ship. They would trade. They would warn. But they would not cross the low ridges beyond the tidal flats. Not for pay. Not for honor. Not even to recover bodies. This land walks at night. One elder said to a translator, his eyes fixed not on the Europeans, but on the dogs. It learns your shape. The leader recorded the remark in his journal as folklore, a cultural curiosity, an artifact to be cataloged and forgotten. By every known rule of command, that was the first mistake. The landing was clean, too clean, no resistance from ice, no sudden squalls, the kind of smooth insertion that breeds confidence. They unloaded crates in practiced silence, erected canvas shelters, stacked fuel, and staked out the dogs in a ring designed to detect predators. The animals were calm at first. That changed on the second night, not with barking, not with panic, with refusal. The dogs would not face the dark beyond the camp perimeter. They twisted their bodies inward, tails tucked, hackles raised, not toward the wind or the distant ice, but toward the low ground where nothing appeared to be moving. Handlers corrected them. The dogs resisted. A rifle was fired into the air to reassert dominance. The sound died quickly, swallowed by the vastness. No echo came back. By every known rule of behavior, predators announce themselves in the Arctic. Even polar bears make noise. Silence is a tactic used by men. That night, the watches were doubled. Morning revealed no tracks near camp, no broken snow, no signs of intrusion. The leader allowed himself a thin smile. Animals behave strangely in new environments, he wrote. Stress, unfamiliar sense. They broke camp and moved inland. The terrain rose gradually, deceptive in its gentleness. Shallow valleys, sparse scrub, old snowfields stained gray by age. Visibility extended for miles, which made the sense of being observed feel absurd. And yet the dogs lagged. They stopped frequently, sniffed the air, whined without direction. The handlers began to argue among themselves, not loudly, but with the clipped tones of men whose confidence is thinning. By mid-afternoon, they found the caribou. It had been killed cleanly. No frenzy, no wasted motion. The throat open with precision. The body dragged, not torn, away from where it fell. The marks in the snow suggested effort, not hunger. A hunter kills to eat. A soldier kills to remove a threat. No rational commander would assume the second explanation, and yet no one spoke the first aloud. They moved on faster after that. The first storm came without ceremony, a low-pressure system sliding in like a curtain being drawn. Wind rose. Snow flattened depth perception until distance lost meaning. They huddled under canvas while the world erased itself around them. It was during this storm that the night watchman vanished, not taken from camp, not dragged screaming into the dark, simply gone between checks. By every known rule of military security, this should have triggered immediate consolidation, a perimeter sweep, a fallback position. But storms rewrite doctrine. You do not chase ghosts when exposure will kill you faster than any enemy. They waited. When dawn returned, thin, pale, and cruel, they found tracks. Not human, not animal. The impressions were elongated, weight-bearing in a way that suggested upright movement. Too narrow for boots, too deliberate for paws. They circled the camp, crossed and recrossed each other, stopped at the empty space where the watchman should have been, then continued inland. The leader ordered the men to destroy the tracks, not out of fear, but discipline. Panic spreads faster than cold. He told them they were being tested by the environment. History would later note that this was the second mistake. From that moment forward, sleep became a liability. Men do not rest when they believe they are being evaluated. Every sound became intent. Every shadow acquired purpose. The dogs now growled at empty ground. Rifles were cleaned compulsively. Ammunition was counted and recounted. The journal entries shortened. What had begun as a survey had become a movement under pressure. Not retreat, not advance. Something worse, continuation without clarity. By every known rule of warfare, when you cannot identify the enemy, you are already losing. On the fifth night, the howling began. Not wolves. Wolves called to each other. This sound did not seek an answer. It announced presence, close enough to be unmistakable, far enough to be unreachable. The men formed a ring around the lamps. Beyond the light, something shifted its weight, and for the first time since leaving the coast, the leader understood the arithmetic of their position. They were outnumbered. They were exhausted, and whatever was watching them had learned exactly how they moved. Early September, 1903. By every known rule of endurance, the human body should already have failed. The cold had stopped behaving like weather and begun behaving like strategy. It arrived in pulses, testing reactions, measuring weakness. Wind stripped heat faster than clothing could replace it. Frostbite no longer announced itself a pain. It simply removed sensation and waited to be discovered. Sleep collapsed into fragments, 10 minutes at a time, 15 if luck intervened. Men began to dream while awake, their thoughts folding back on themselves. In this state, discipline becomes a rumor, not a fact. The howling returned each night, never closer, never farther, always synchronized with the weakest hours before dawn, when judgment dulls and rifles feel heavier than they should. The sound carried a rhythm that was wrong, too measured, too controlled. It did not wander. It marked distance. By every known rule of hunting, predators circle until prey breaks formation. Whatever followed them had learned this rule well. The leader made his first irreversible decision on the seventh day inland. They would continue forward. Turning back meant retracing ground already measured by whatever stalked them. Retreat signaled vulnerability. Forward motion, he reasoned, preserved initiative. It was a logic drawn from battlefields, not wilderness. But in his mind, the distinction no longer mattered. The men obeyed. They always obeyed. But obedience under doubt corrodes from the inside. Sleds drag heavier. Commands required repetition. Small errors multiplied. Mispacked loads, poorly tied lines, missed signals. The dog sensed it first. Animals understand momentum better than men. That afternoon, one of the dogs broke free. It did not run. It lunged at the empty air beyond the ridge and died mid-leap, its spine snapping as if struck by something invisible and heavy. There was no sound of impact, only the sudden absence of movement. By every known rule of physics, force requires contact, and yet the snow where the dog fell was crushed inward, as though something had passed through it at speed. The handlers refused to approach the body. The leader ordered it butchered for meat. No one argued, but no one ate. That night, the first man spoke the word. Adlet. It was said quietly, not as belief, as hypothesis, as an attempt to name the pressure closing around them. Naming a threat creates the illusion of control. The others did not respond. They did not need to. In war, there is a moment when denial ends not with argument but with silence. When every man realizes the same thing at the same time and understands that speaking it changes nothing. The watches were tripled. Rifles were kept loaded. Safeties off. Still, something reached the outer edge of camp and stopped just beyond the lamps. Not hidden. Waiting. The next disappearance occurred at dawn. A surveyor assigned to check instruments failed to return. His footprints led away from camp in a straight line, unbroken, as if he had walked willingly. No struggle. No drag marks. Half a mile out, the tracks ended. Not turned back. Not scattered. Ended. The snow beyond was untouched. By every known rule of pursuit, this should have been impossible. Even carry pray leave signs. Even the wind leaves signatures. The leader ordered no chase. This time, it was not discipline that stopped him, it was understanding. Whatever had taken a man could cross ground without marking it. Distance offered no safety. They burned his effects that evening, not as ceremony, as sanitation. Food became an enemy. Rations shrank faster than calculations predicted. Men ate without remembering eating. Hunger sharpened tempers and dulled perception. The leader revised a march schedule, pushing longer hours to shorten exposure. By every known rule of survival, fatigue accelerates death, but standing still had begun to feel worse. The terrain narrowed into a shallow basin, high ground on three sides, a textbook kill zone. No rational commander would enter it. They entered anyway. Night fell early there. The wind died. Sound carried too clearly. Every breath echoed. The howling came from above, from multiple elevations, surrounding them, not closing in, holding position. By every known rule of warfare, this was containment. One of the men fired into darkness. The sound was answered by laughter. Not animal, not human, something that approximated both and failed at each. The dogs broke their lines and fled into the dark. None returned. At some point before dawn, the leader realized a truth he had been avoiding. This was not a pursuit. It was a study. They were not being driven out. They were being learned. Their reactions cataloged. Their thresholds tested. Every mistake recorded. And now the environment itself had been shaped to keep them exactly where they were most vulnerable. When light finally returned, it revealed something new. Marks in the snow around the basin. Symbols. Not random. Not natural. Deliberate. The kind made by something that understands meaning. The men refused to step outside the circle of their own footprints. They waited for orders that did not come. And somewhere beyond the ridge, something adjusted its plan. Mid-September, 1903. By every known rule of attrition, this was the phase where survivors had decided. The basin had become a holding cell. The air inside it felt heavier, as if the cold itself had been compressed. Breath crystallized and fell straight down, no longer carried away by wind. Sound lingered. Words refused to dissipate. Men spoke less because hearing themselves felt like a mistake. The leader finally ordered a break from the basin at first light. It was not a tactical withdrawal. It was an escape attempt. By every known rule of movement under threat, daylight offers advantage. Visibility restores control. But daylight in the Arctic does not banish danger. It merely reveals how exposed you truly are. They climbed. The slope was shallow but relentless. Sled runners screeched against hidden ice. Fingers bled where mittens had stiffened into useless shells. The men leaned forward like infantry under artillery, each step an act of stubborn defiance against gravity and exhaustion. Halfway up, the snow ahead of them collapsed, not under weight, inward, as if something had stepped out of it. The first man fell without a sound, his rifle torn from his hands. He was lifted, not dragged, lifted backward and up his legs kicking at nothing before vanishing behind the rise. The attack lasted less than 3 seconds. By every known rule of combat, that was impossible. No shout, no struggle, no time to react. The men fired blindly into the ridge line, the reports echoing uselessly across the basin. Nothing answered. The slope was empty again, except for the rifle, snapped clean in half. Panic did not erupt. It settled. There is a difference. Explosive fear wastes energy. This fear conserved it. Men stopped thinking in terms of plans and began thinking in terms of minutes. Hands shook constantly now, not from cold alone, but from the body's admission that it was no longer in control. The leader ordered a defensive perimeter halfway up the slope. This was the third mistake. High ground favors defenders only when the enemy respects geometry. Whatever hunted them moved vertically as easily as laterally. Height meant nothing. The howling returned, closer than ever. Now it carried modulation, pacing, as if different voices were taking turns. By every known rule of psychology, this was dominance behavior, a reminder of presence, a declaration of ownership. One of the men began to pray. Another began to laugh. Both were silenced by the same understanding. Noise invited attention. The journals from this period changed tone. No measurements, no sketches, only observations of sensation, pressure behind the eyes, the feeling of being counted, the certainty that sleep would not come again. The leader wrote a single sentence that night. We are no longer moving through the land. The land is moving us. Before dawn, something entered the camp, not crashing through, not charging, walking, footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. They circled the perimeter, crunching softly in the snow, stopping occasionally as if inspecting equipment. A gloved hand tightened on a trigger. Another loosened. No one fired. By every known rule of survival, this restraint should be applauded. Fire reveals position. Ammunition is finite, but this was not restraint. It was paralysis. The footsteps stopped behind one of the tents. Canvas stretched inward, a silhouette pressed against it. Too tall. The shape tilted its head, as if listening. Then it withdrew. Nothing was taken. Nothing was broken. The message was clear. Access was absolute. At first light, they counted heads. They were down to 7. No bodies recovered. No blood trails. No evidence that could be recorded or explained. Only absence. The leader gathered the men and told them the truth as he now understood it. They would abandon the instruments, the plates, the rods, everything that slowed them. They would move fast, light, and without stops. The coast was still weeks away, but movement was their only remaining agency. By every known rule of logistics, this plan bordered on suicide. The men agreed instantly. Agreement, in this case, was not confidence. It was surrender to momentum. They burned what they could not carry. Black smoke climbed into the white sky, a signal visible for miles. Whatever watched from the ridges did not intervene. It did not need to. They marched for 14 hours without pause. No howling, no pursuit. The silence was worse. Silence implies repositioning. As night fell, the leader felt it for the first time, a certainty so sharp it bordered on relief. They were being herded. The land funneled them toward a narrow pass, steep-walled and shadowed even at midday. The maps showed nothing there. No notation, no warning. By every known rule of warfare, uncharted passes are traps. The men entered anyway, because the alternative was stopping. And stopping had already been proven fatal. As the last of the light drained away, the temperature dropped suddenly, violently, as if a door had been opened somewhere above them. From deep within the pass came a sound none of them had heard before. Not a howl, not a laugh. A call, answered immediately from behind them. Late September, 1903. By every known rule of encirclement, this was the moment resistance collapses. The pass narrowed until the walls felt close enough to lean against. Rock faces rose sheer, black with old ice, swallowing sound and light. The men moved single file now, not by choice, but by geometry. Rifles were useless in formation like this. Fields of fire vanished. Reaction time collapsed to nothing. The call echoed again. It rolled through the stone like artillery through trenches, vibrating in the chest more than the ears. It was not language, but it carried intent. The dogs would have understood it, had any still lived. The leader halted the column. No rational commander would stop in a kill corridor, but momentum had become an enemy. If they were to die here, he needed to see it coming. The silence that followed was deliberate. Then the snow began to move, not sliding, standing. Figures rose along the ridge lines where no ledges should have existed. Too fluid to be human, too structured to be animal. They did not rush. They did not charge. They simply revealed themselves. 7 men faced at least 12 shapes. Numerical imbalance. By every known rule of warfare, this ends only one way. The first volley was reflexive. Rifle cracks shattered the stillness. Muzzle flashes briefly carved the shapes into clarity. Elongated limbs, reversed joints, heads carried too low. One figure fell, twisting unnaturally as it struck the rock face below. It did not bleed. It did not cry out. It climbed back up. The men reloaded with numb hands, the mechanical memory of training carrying them forward while belief drained away. Shots landed, impacts registered, and nothing stopped. By every known rule of ballistics, flesh yields, bone fractures, momentum transfers. Here, none of it mattered. The Adlet descended, not all at once, in pairs, breaking formation, forcing the men to turn, to split attention, to lose cohesion. This was not savagery. It was doctrine. The first man died without contact. Something struck his chest from a distance, compressing it inward with a sound like breaking ice. He folded and fell, lungs collapsed, eyes wide in disbelief. The second was taken upward, slammed into the rock wall, and left hanging there, pinned by nothing visible. Screams echoed once, then stopped. The leader fired until his rifle clicked empty. When the world narrowed to that small sound, he understood something final. These things were not testing anymore. They were concluding. One of the men broke and ran. He made it 3 steps. The snow beneath him erupted, lifting him clean off his feet. He vanished into a vertical seam in a rock face that should not have existed. The pass itself was participating. By every known rule of terrain analysis, stone does not open and close. Snow does not behave like water. And yet here, the environment had become an extension of the enemy. The remaining men back together instinctively, shoulders touching, breathing in sync. There is a strange comfort in last stands. Clarity returns when options vanish. The leader shouted an order he knew would not be obeyed. Hold. They held. They fired. They died. Only the leader remained. Not spared. Observed. A shape stepped close enough that he could see its eyes. Reflective, pale, set too far apart. The face was wrong, assembled rather than grown. It leaned down, studying him with something like curiosity. By every known rule of predation, this should have ended quickly. Instead, the creature reached out and touched his chest. Not violently, deliberately. The cold vanished. The leader felt heat surge through him, burning, invasive, rewriting sensation. His vision flooded with images that were not memories. Paths through ice, the shape of storms before they formed, the smell of fear as a navigational aid. He understood then. The Adlet did not hunt to kill. They harvested knowledge. The creature withdrew its hand. The leader collapsed. When he woke, the pass was empty. The bodies were gone. The snow was smooth. No tracks. No evidence. By every known rule of aftermath, survival should have brought relief. Instead, it brought certainty. He had been allowed to leave. October 1903. By every known rule of survival, no one should have heard this story at all. The leader staggered out of the pass alone. Not fleeing. Not rescued. Released. The Arctic beyond felt different now. Not hostile, but indifferent in a way that was worse. The wind resumed its ordinary cruelty. The cold returned to its familiar bite. Nature had stepped back, its role complete. He walked for 2 days without memory of distance. Hunger registered only as pressure. Sleep came in collapses, not rest. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. The basin, viewed from above, the men arranged like markers on a board. He knew now how it had been done. He reached the coast at the edge of collapse. Inuit hunters found him crawling along the ice, hands shredded, lips blackened. They did not approach until he stopped moving. They tied him, not out of cruelty, but protocol. Men who emerge alone from inland routes are not always themselves. When he spoke, they listened. When he described the past, they nodded. When he said the word Adlet, no one corrected him. They carried him back to the settlement and kept him away from the dogs. The animals refused to come near him anyway, whining and pulling at their tethers as if something clung to his shadow. By every known rule of testimony, trauma distorts memory, but the Inuit did not treat his account as confusion. They treated it as confirmation. The official report was filed 3 months later. It listed the expedition as loss to exposure, miscalculation, and weather, equipment failure, human error, no mention of tracks that ended abruptly, no symbols in the snow, no unexplained compressive injuries. Photographic plates recovered from the coast shipment were blank, not overexposed. Blank. The journals ended mid-sentence. The leader never returned north. He resigned quietly, lived sparsely, and refused all invitations to speak publicly. When pressed, he said only that some regions were not unmapped because they were unknown, but because they were guarded. He slept with the lights on for the rest of his life. In the years that followed, similar expeditions altered their routes without explanation. Maps gained empty spaces where lines once had been planned. Inuit warnings began appearing in translated notes as areas of persistent loss. No legends, no monsters, just absence. By every known rule of history, patterns require repetition to be believed. This one had enough. The Arctic remains vast, surveyed, measured, cataloged, and yet there are still corridors no one walks through, passes where sound behaves incorrectly, basins where dogs refuse to face the dark. The land remembers. And in 1903, it learned something new. It learned the shape of men who thought they were alone.